Picture a kingdom caught between the crushing weight of the Holy Roman Empire and the unstoppable terror of the Mongol Golden Horde. History dictates that this nation should have disappeared 1,000 years ago, swallowed by the very empires it fought to hold back. Yet, from the pagan forests of the Vistula rose a dynasty that didn't just survive, they rewrote the rules of European power. From Mieszko's high-stakes gamble with Christianity to Casimir the Great, transforming a wooden wasteland into a stone superpower, the story of Poland is a brutal, epic masterclass in resilience. But how did a collection of fractured Slavic tribes execute a rise so rapid and so powerful that it threatened to eclipse every throne in the West? The answer begins with a legend, a crown, and a choice that changed the map of the world forever. How did a collection of scattered pagan tribes, squeezed between the shifting powers of the East and West, transform into one of the most formidable empires in European history? This is the epic saga of Poland, a story of survival, divine ambition, and the relentless will to exist. From the legendary flight of the White Eagle to the strategic baptism that changed the map of Europe forever, we are diving deep into the rise of the Piast Dynasty. You'll witness the iron will of Mieszko I, the unstoppable conquests of Bolesław the Brave, and the visionary rule of Casimir the Great, the king who found a nation of wood and left it built of stone. This isn't just a timeline of events, it's the untold story of the birth of a nation that refused to break. This is the history of Poland. To understand how this miracle of survival happened, we have to go back to a time when Poland didn't even exist on a map. In the mid-10th century, the heart of Central Europe was a dense, impenetrable wilderness of marshes and ancient forests. Here, the Western Slavs, specifically the Polans, or people of the fields, lived in fortified settlements called grads. They were a people of the earth, governed by tribal councils and ancient pagan gods of thunder and harvest. But they were also a people living on borrowed time. The geopolitical landscape of the 900s was a meat grinder. To the west, the Holy Roman Empire was expanding with terrifying momentum, fueled by the conviction that any land not under the cross was a land ripe for conquest. To the east and north, rival tribes and shifting alliances meant that a single weak harvest or a botched raid could lead to total enslavement. This is the pain point of the Polish origin story. They were caught in a vice. If they remained a collection of fractured, squabbling tribes, they were destined to become a mere footnote. Another lost culture assimilated into the Germanic or Viking tides. This isn't just ancient trivia, it's a masterclass in high-stakes survival. Every choice made in these smoke-filled timber halls determined whether a language, a culture, and a future nation would even be allowed to exist. The pressure was absolute, and the margin for error was zero. You have to wonder, what kind of mind does it take to look at two encroaching superpowers and decide, I won't just survive them, I will compete with them? Most traditional history books will tell you that the birth of Poland was a peaceful transition, a spiritual awakening where a pagan duke saw the light and led his people to the baptismal font. But the chronicles hidden in the shadows of the Dark Ages tell a different story. It wasn't a moment of divine grace. It was the most cold-blooded, calculated political gamble in the history of Europe. Enter Mieszko I. He wasn't just a tribal chieftain. He was a warlord operating in a world where the only thing cheaper than dirt was human life. To understand the gravity of his situation, you have to realize that in the 10th century, the term Slav was literally becoming the linguistic root for the word slave in Western languages. To the expanding Germanic powers and the Mediterranean markets, the pagan tribes of the Vistula weren't seen as a sovereign people. They were seen as inventory. Mieszko was looking at a map that wanted to erase him before he even started. To his west, the Holy Roman Emperor, Otto the Great, was consolidating power with a terrifying efficiency, using Christianization as a legal justification to steamroll through Slavic lands. To his south, the Bohemians were a constant threat. Mieszko was presiding over a nation of timber and fur, facing off against an empire of iron and stone. If he fought the tide, his people would be slaughtered. If he did nothing, they would be enslaved. This is the psychological pressure cooker of the Piast origins. It wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about preventing the extinction of an entire culture. Every alliance, every fortification, and every marriage was a desperate move on a chessboard where the opponent had 10 times the pieces. But here is where the narrative shifts from a story of survival to a story of absolute genius. You've been told that Mieszko I accepted Christianity because he was moved by the faith of his wife Dobrawa, or that he saw the spiritual light. That is the Sunday school version. The reality? Mieszko. I didn't just join the church. He executed a hostile takeover of the enemy's most powerful weapon. He realized that the only way to stop a crusade was to become the crusader. In 966 AD, Mieszko made his move. He didn't just get baptized, he bypassed the aggressive German bishops entirely and pledged his realm directly to the Pope in Rome. It was a diplomatic masterstroke. Overnight, the Holy Roman Empire lost its legal excuse to invade. To attack Poland now was to attack the Church itself. Mieszko didn't just buy his people time, he bought them a seat at the European table. But surviving an empire is one thing. Building one that terrifies them is another. Enter his son, Bolesław the Brave. If Mieszko was the architect, Bolesław was the wrecking ball. He looked at the borders his father secured and decided they weren't big enough. But to become a true European heavyweight, he needed something money couldn't buy. He needed a royal crown. And the Pope wasn't just handing those out to upstart Slavic warlords. So, Bolesław executed a bizarre, brilliant medieval PR stunt. When a missionary named Adalbert was murdered by pagan Prussians, Bolesław bought the body back. The price? The saint's exact weight in pure gold. He buried Adalbert in Gniezno, turning his capital into a massive, undeniable pilgrimage site. The move was so prestigious that even the Holy Roman Emperor had to come pay his respects. The leverage worked. In 1025, Bolesław was officially crowned the first king of Poland. He had taken a hunted tribe and forged them into an apex predator. But victory is notoriously fragile. Bolesław died just months after his coronation. At the moment his eyes closed, the empire he bled to build didn't just crack. It violently imploded. Within a decade, the crown was gone. The peasants, sick of crushing taxes and forced baptisms, snapped. A massive, bloody pagan rebellion swept the countryside, burning churches to the ground and slaughtering the elite. Bohemia saw the chaos, marched right into the capital, and looted the cathedral. They didn't just steal the gold. They stole the literal bones of Saint Adalbert. Poland's ultimate PR asset was gone. The kingdom shattered into a dozen warring puzzle pieces. For 200 years, Polish dukes butchered each other over scraps of dirt. It was a dark age within the dark ages. But while they fought over the scraps, the apocalypse arrived from the east. In 1241, the Mongol Golden Horde rode in. They didn't come to conquer, they came to erase. At the Battle of Legnica, heavily armored Polish knights thought they could crush these light horsemen. They were dead wrong. The Mongols unleashed a tactical nightmare of feigned retreats and toxic smoke, Europe's first taste of chemical warfare. The Polish forces were obliterated. The High Duke was decapitated, his head paraded on a spear. and the Mongols filled 9 massive sacks with the severed ears of the fallen Poles. Poland was reduced to a smoldering graveyard, but out of those ashes, a new predator stepped into the vacuum: the Teutonic Knights. Originally invited as mercenaries to help fight northern pagans, these ruthless warrior monks went rogue. They built impenetrable red brick castles, carving out a heavily militarized extremist state and choking off Poland's access to the Baltic Sea. By the early 1300s, Poland wasn't a nation. It was prey, crushed by Mongols, terrorized by rogue crusaders, and divided by greedy lords. The Polish experiment was flatlining. To survive, they didn't need another warlord. They needed a visionary, a king who could look at a scorched wasteland of wood and mud and forge an indestructible fortress of stone. Enter Casimir the Great, the man who inherited a pile of kindling and built a geopolitical juggernaut. When Casimir took the throne in 1333, Poland was bankrupt, surrounded by superpowers, and literally made of flammable timber. One bad siege, and the kingdom was ash. His enemies expected him to draw his sword and wage a desperate, bloody war. Instead, he waged the most aggressive economic campaign the Middle Ages had ever seen. Casimir didn't just rebuild cities, he revolutionized how power worked. He realized that a medieval king's greatest weapon wasn't a cavalry charge, it was cash flow. He minted a unified currency. He standardized the legal code. And he triggered a massive infrastructure boom, constructing over 50 state-of-the-art stone castles along the frontier. Overnight, he turned Poland's borders into an absolute meat grinder for anyone foolish enough to invade. But stone walls don't defend themselves. You need a booming economy to fund the garrisons. So, Casimir pulled off a demographic masterstroke. While Western Europe was actively persecuting and expelling its Jewish populations, Casimir threw the doors wide open. He offered them royal protection, religious freedom, and unprecedented legal rights. It wasn't just a humanitarian move, it was a brutal economic hack. The sudden influx of scholars, merchants, and bankers supercharged the Polish economy. Poland didn't just recover from the Mongol apocalypse, it became the medieval equivalent of an economic powerhouse. But there was still a massive, heavily armored problem looming in the north: the Teutonic Knights. They were heavily funded, militarily superior, and completely fanatical. Casimir knew that even with his new stone fortresses, going toe-to-toe with the rogue crusaders was suicide. Poland was wealthy, but it was still too small. To break the Teutonic stranglehold, Casimir had to do the impossible. He had to pivot the entire axis of European power. If he couldn't beat them on the battlefield, he was going to beat them in the courtroom. He founded the University of Krakow, breeding a new generation of hyper-educated diplomats. These Polish lawyers systematically outmaneuvered the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, legally stripping the Teutonic Knights of their justification to raid Polish lands. Casimir literally bought Poland the time it needed to grow into an apex predator. He had fulfilled the prophecy. He found a nation of wood and left it built of stone. But for all his undisputed genius, Casimir had one fatal flaw. He died in 1370 without a legitimate male heir. Just like that, the legendary Piast Dynasty, the bloodline of Mieszko and Bolesław, the family that had dragged Poland from the pagan mud of the Dark Ages, went completely extinct. The throne was empty. The Teutonic Knights smelled blood in the water. Poland was staring down the barrel of total annihilation. Again. To survive this time, they didn't just need a king, they needed an empire. And to get one, the Polish lords looked east, toward the last massive pagan wilderness left in Europe, Lithuania. What happened next wasn't just a political marriage. It was a terrifying merger that was about to birth the largest, most unstoppable military superpower the continent had ever seen. The Polish lords didn't just draft a treaty, they engineered a geopolitical earthquake. They took their 11-year-old female monarch, Jadwiga, who was legally crowned as a king, not a queen, to ensure her absolute authority, and married her to Jogaila, the pagan Grand Duke of Lithuania. With one vow, Jogaila converted to Christianity and fused two massive realms together. The payoff was instant. Poland and Lithuania transformed overnight into a colossal, twin-engine superpower stretching from the Baltic straight down to the Black Sea. But size doesn't guarantee survival. Up north, the Teutonic Knights weren't intimidated. They were absolutely furious. The Knights had built their entire Crusader state on the excuse of violently converting Lithuanian pagans. Now that Lithuania was officially Christian, the Knights lost their holy mandate. Did they pack up their swords and go home? Not a chance. They doubled down. They launched a massive propaganda campaign across Western Europe, screaming that the conversion was a total sham. Fueled by foreign gold and heavily armored mercenaries, the Knights prepared to strangle this new Polish-Lithuanian alliance in its crib. The ultimate showdown wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was a ticking clock. In the blistering summer of 1410, that clock finally ran out. The two largest armies in medieval Europe violently collided in a field near the village of Grunwald. This was a winner-takes-all death match. On one side, the absolute elite of Western heavy cavalry, the iron-clad Teutonic Knights. On the other, a terrifyingly diverse coalition of Polish knights, Lithuanian light cavalry, Tatar horse archers, and Bohemian mercenaries. The heavily armored knights looked at the lighter eastern forces and assumed it would be an absolute slaughter. They were completely blind to the deadly trap about to snap shut. Just hours into the bloodbath, the Lithuanian cavalry suddenly broke rank and fled the battlefield in sheer panic. The disciplined Teutonic Knights took the bait. Eager for the kill, they broke their own impenetrable defensive lines to chase down the retreating pagans. It wasn't a panic. It was a perfectly executed step feint. The Lithuanians violently wheeled around and slammed right back into the exhausted, disorganized knights, while the Polish heavy infantry crushed them from the center. The Teutonic Grand Master was slaughtered. The elite Crusader army was systematically annihilated in the mud. Poland didn't just win a battle. They permanently broke the spine of their greatest enemy. But absolute power creates an absolute vacuum. With their ultimate rival destroyed, a terrifying new question emerged. What happens when an unstoppable empire runs out of external enemies to fight? The triumph at Grunwald was more than just a military victory. It was the final, thunderous answer to the question that had haunted the Vistula for 500 years. How does a nation born in the shadows of giants avoid being crushed? By evolving faster than the empires trying to erase them. The Piasts and their successors didn't just play the Game of Thrones. They broke the board and built a new one. They took the meat grinder of Central Europe and turned it into a forge. From Mieszko's cold-blooded baptism to Casimir's impenetrable stone fortresses, and finally to the colossal union with Lithuania, the story of Poland is the ultimate masterclass in geopolitical alchemy. They took a collection of people of the fields and transformed them into the shield of a continent. They proved that a nation's survival isn't determined by its borders, but by the relentless, unbreakable will of its people to exist. The wooden wasteland was gone, replaced by a golden age that would light up the map of Europe for centuries to come. This is the miracle of Poland, a country that wasn't supposed to exist, yet became the very pillar upon which the history of the West would lean. The fractured tribes didn't just find a seat at the table. They became the ones who decided who else was allowed to sit down. Their rise wasn't an accident of history, it was a defiant act of creation that rewrote the fate of Europe forever. So, how did they do it? How did a collection of scattered tribes, trapped in a geographic vice, evolve into the very pillar of Western civilization? It wasn't a miracle of chance. It was a miracle of will. Poland didn't just survive the meat grinder of history, they dismantled it. They took the tools of their oppressors, the bureaucracy of the empire, the faith of the West, and the iron of the North, and forged a shield that refused to shatter. The wooden wasteland didn't just turn to stone, it turned into a beacon. The answer to the mystery we set out to solve is this: Poland exists because its leaders realized that to be a nation, you must first be an idea that cannot be killed. From Mieszko's high-stakes baptism to Casimir's economic revolution and the ironclad victory at Grunwald, the story of Poland is the story of the underdog rewriting the laws of power. They were the people of the fields who became the masters of the fortress. They proved that a nation's strength isn't measured by the empires it faces, but by the resilience it shows when it's backed into a corner. Today, the White Eagle stands not just as a symbol of a country, but as a monument to the impossible. The Polish experiment didn't just work. It set the stage for everything Europe would become. This is the ultimate victory. To be forgotten by history was their destiny, yet they became the ones who wrote it. The story of Poland's rise is more than just a sequence of battles and coronations. It is a masterclass in the art of the impossible. It teaches us that a nation's destiny isn't written by its neighbors or its geography. It is forged by the audacity to reinvent oneself when the world demands your disappearance. This is the lesson of the Piasts, that strategic brilliance can outmaneuver brute force, and that a culture's most impenetrable fortress isn't made of stone, but of a collective, unyielding will to exist. Poland stands as the ultimate testament to the underdog, a reminder that even when caught between empires, you don't have to be a victim of history. You can be its architect. They didn't just survive the meat grinder of the Middle Ages. They emerged as the shield of a continent, proving that an idea rooted in resilience can never truly be erased. From the pagan wilderness to a European superpower, they showed the world that power isn't just inherited. It's seized through the courage to stand your ground when the map says you shouldn't exist. The defiance of the White Eagle didn't stop at the gates of Grunwald. This same iron will eventually give birth to the most legendary cavalry in human history, warriors who would one day decide the fate of entire civilizations. If you want to see how this resilient nation evolved from a wooden wasteland into the literal saviors of the West, click the video on your screen right now. We are deep diving into the epic sagas of the world's most unlikely superpowers, and you won't want to miss the next move on history's high-stakes chessboard. Tap that video to witness the next chapter.